Hello, and welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. In this one, we have some developments in the Avdiivka direction, as well as reports coming from the Zaporizhzhia direction. Starting out in the Avdiivka direction, we see that the Russians have managed to make an advance where they managed to plant their flag here on the western outskirts of Avdiivka by the main entrance to the city. This is exactly where Zelensky did his "We will defend Avdiivka" video a couple of months ago, and with this the Russians have gained full control over the main supply route in and out of the city, and the Russians with this are now full control over the area here in between the northern and southern parts, where the northern parts is the coke plant and the southern parts is the rest of the city. So with this, the Russians have now completely split the city in two and have gained full control over the main supply route. Now we have here to the south of those positions, the Russians have advanced in two directions from here. In the southern direction towards the secondary supply line in and out of the city, and the second direction towards Lastoshkine. With this, the Russians are now only 500 meters from the main supply route in and out of the city, considering the northern one has been cut off physically. And with this, the Russians would have fire control over the part from the northern direction and also only 500 meters from physically cutting it. If the Russians physically cut this part right here, then the Ukrainians would still have a newly gained supply route, newly gained because the Ukrainians launched a counterattack earlier today, which allowed them to push back the Russians back here southeast of Sheverne, which allowed them to regain control over this route here. This route is another dirt road that goes from Sheverne to the east, down south, goes through the forest lines down south to the Citadel area. So with this, the Ukrainians would be able to resupply the Citadel area itself and move therefrom into the eastern parts of the city. This is also very close to Russian positions. Right here, it is 500 meters away. So again, there are 500 meters between the Russians and the Ukrainian supply lines, which means that there's 500 meters between Russia physically completely encircling the city of Avdiivka. What this means is that the Russians have two focuses right now. The first one is developing the situation in the north so that they can physically cut off the supply route in and out of Avdiivka by moving 500 meters further south and moving in the direction of Lastoshkine to completely gain control over this area here by the main supply route before moving into and capturing the coke plant to the north of these positions. As for the southern parts, the southern flank of Avdiivka, the Russians will here look to advance in the northern direction to physically cut this road that goes from the Citadel area and here in the western direction. So the Russians are looking to physically cut all supply routes in and out of Avdiivka, which will significantly speed up the takeover of the city. The advancements made here in the north are reported to have taken place due to a series of ambushes launched by the Russian army, catching the Ukrainian 3rd Azov Brigade off guard when they arrived to the city, and with that they took advantage of the panic and managed to make these advancements, preventing them from entering the city. The situation in Avdiivka, as described by NBC News, Ukraine withdraws units from parts of Avdiivka, sends in Crack Brigade as Russia closes in. I'm guessing they name it Crack Brigade because it's a coke plant they want to defend, but who am I to judge? The point being, later down, the 3rd Azov Brigade talks about how the situation in Avdiivka was hell and threatening and unstable. Notice how the article refuses to call them the 3rd Azov Brigade and instead calls them the 3rd Assault Brigade. The only point in this article they call it Azov is here in this video. Other than that, they name brigade about 9 times, yet Azov a single time. The main reason for this is likely because Azov has become synonymous with, as history legends calls them, ideologically motivated soldiers. So the situation right now is that the Ukrainians sent in these reinforcements, especially these, as history legends calls them, ideologically motivated soldiers moving through the front line, trying to counterattack, while the Ukrainians are seeking to expand the supply capacity of their army into the city, while the Russians are trying to limit it. What we're seeing on their side is attacks on every single supply route they get their hands on and their eyes on. So what we're seeing is that there's constant attempts by the Russians to simply storm these positions by the Ukrainians, launching countless FPV drone strikes and other assaults on these positions, constant FAB 500 strikes, as we see in this video here, which shows a part of Avdiivka with a lot of smoke coming up from FAB 500 strikes. As for the current weather conditions, there is this video here which shows something very interesting, and that is one of the trenches somewhere in Ukraine. I'm not really sure where, but the point is, look at the mud that is filled as well as the water that is filled up in this trench. This makes it very difficult for the soldiers to live in these trenches, especially if they have to stay there for long periods of time. A common symptom of this in First World War was a lot of diseases that comes when your feet are constantly submerged. Even if they have good boots, you'll still be in a situation where you will subtract some diseases and so on. And these are all completely rat infested. So there's a lot of issues coming with the spring season. At least at the very least, the Ukrainians and the Russians would no longer be freezing in these trenches. And just now there's been this update. The Russians have managed to capture this fortification here to the southwest of Avdiivka. They've managed to capture the bridge area here to the north of the military base and the rest of the military base. This has been confirmed with the visual confirmation as we see with this picture here, and it has also been geolocated to this area. So with this we see that the Russians now have control over the fortification here and the military base, and the rest of the dacha area is now being cleared by Russian stormtroopers fighting within the dacha area. So with this, the Russians are now in full control of the southwest, where there are some cleaning operations, but that's about it. And then they will likely move northern towards the main supply route here, going south of the Citadel area here to the southwest of Avdiivka, which is the only other supply route other than the one north of the Citadel area, which is 500 meters away from current Russian positions. So Russia is only 500 meters from fully encircling Avdiivka from all of the supply routes in and out of the city. Moving on to the Zaporizhzhia front, there has been reports by both Russian and Ukrainian sources. The reports say that there is a large concentration of Russian forces here in the Zaporizhzhia front, going all the way from Kamyansk to the west and all the way to Velika Novosilka in the east. So this whole area has been an increase in offensive forces by the Russians. Therefore, both sides are now predicting an upcoming Russian offensive in the Zaporizhzhia region. The reports say that the Russian goal will likely be Orikhiv, possibly also Huliaipole, but likely not a full offensive to Zaporizhzhia, but instead a stepping or building up operation where they want to capture Orikhiv and Huliaipole to stage a future offensive against the city of Zaporizhzhia. Based on this information, we see that the Russians are now preparing for pretty much an all-out offensive across the whole front line in the spring season. We see here that the Russians are building up forces both in the Zaporizhzhia front and in the Kharkiv front, the Kharkiv-Luhansk-Donetsk front against Liman and Kupiansk, in the Zaporizhzhia front against Orikhiv and Huliaipole, and in the Donetsk front against Chasiv, and in the future, which would expand to Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, in the direction of Avdiivka, which would expand to Pokrovsk, in the direction of Marinka, Novomikhailivka, and Pobieda, to expand to Volodar and further westwards here in the Donetsk region. What I'm saying is that the Russians are currently doing the final preparations for a full frontal assault across the whole front line, and the requirement for this assault to start would be the capture of Avdiivka, and the general situation being in favor of the Russians. We may see that this would not be an organized assault across the whole front line, but continuous small assaults across the front like we see in Avdiivka and in the direction of Bakhmut towards Ivanivsk, etc. So continuous small positional fighting, or we could see a general all-out offensive across the whole front. We don't really know what the planning of the Russians are, but what we can tell is that based on the buildup of troops across the front, there's likely going to be an offensive operations in these different parts, and it's everywhere on the front line that they're building up, and the Ukrainians are just sending all of their lead units to Avdiivka to be grinded up. This means that the Russians are planning to take advantage of this current situation, and this is why we're seeing a general buildup across the front line and a possibility for a future offensive by the Russians across the front line. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.